Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the 16th through 26th verses of the 5th chapter of the book of Galatians. And herein Paul writes of vices of the flesh and virtues of the spirit, and he compares them. But we're actually going to open by acknowledging the fact that human nature consists of more than the bodily element. There is also an invisible and often unacknowledged spiritual element. And this is significant because the choice of words that he uses, flesh, is not quite strictly speaking the same thing as the body. The body is morally neutral. It is possible to feed the body while not diminishing the soul. But because our bodies do have legitimate appetites, we were created with their capacities by a creator who loves us, and he knows that we do have legitimate appetites, but that is to be distinguished from lust. And there's a forbidden connotation in the appetite of lust, which is ultimately unnecessary, sinful, and viceful. And so the 16th verse reads, "And I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." Lust is that choice of words, so it's more than, by that connotation, there's an illegitimate appetite of the flesh. Now, we all have to eat to function, but gluttony would be an example of a lust that's taking food, an intake of food which is not necessary for survival, only to gorge out and to exceed the necessary intake of food. And if we walk in the Spirit, that means we'll take it wherever we are, whatever we do, whatever we say. So there's a constant connotation in that verb, and in as much as we walk in it, we will be immune and invulnerable to the lust of the flesh, which even the born again have to contend with. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do. So, in as much as we follow, now the majority of the human race thinks of themselves solely as physical creatures. They spend their lives accumulating wealth and worldly items and leave unattended the spiritual essence. And that is because the flesh is often ascendant in most of us. There is a battle within every one of us. And the dog which grows the biggest is the dog that we feed the most. So we do have to be mindful of our physical necessities while also attending to our spiritual ones, because they are at war. Now, the spirit and the body are in harmony. They're not at war with each other, but the appetites of the flesh, which are the forbidden desires, are very much antithetical to that which feeds the spirit. Now, the spirit is like a body in that it has appetites and capacities that must be fulfilled and satisfied. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. So this is the once more reiteration and rehashing of the legalistic debate. So the Galatians were contending with a heretical sect of subverters known as the Judaizers, who adhered to a strict reading of the Mosaic law, so they added an alien admixture of legalism to the gospel of grace, which Paul proclaimed. But if he says that if you are led by the Spirit, you will not be under the law, now that does not say that you will not obey and honor the law, because the Spirit and the law owe their origin to the common Creator. Ergo, it is from Him and it is good. And he who follows the Spirit will have no need to have the law. We're going to develop that thought more fully as the discourse progresses. And the works of the flesh are well known, which are adultery, whoring, uncleanness, indecency. So here he proceeds to list out the vices or the manifestations of the unrighteous appetites of the flesh, which can constitute adultery, which has its own sin against it in the Decalogue. It's having sex with someone else's married partner, or having sex outside of your own married partner. Whoring is paying for sex. That roughly falls in the mostly falls in the category of fornication, which is distinct from adultery in that it is just marriage outside of between two unmarried people. And uncleanness, that is, now the Jews had certain hygienic standards, but we can assume that Paul wasn't strictly speaking of uncleanness in the physical sense, but a broader category of spiritual violations. And indecency, that means, in English, it means ill-mannered and just not agreeable, not respecting the norms of civilized dialogue and doing unnecessary and lewd things. Idolatry, drug, sorcery, hatred, quarrels, jealousies, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions. Now, all of these are more or less emotional manifestations as opposed to the actions of its predecessor verse. So idolatry is its own commandment. This is the worshiping of physical statutes or worldly items, anything that we turn to for supreme satisfaction outside of Yahweh and displace him from the center is idolatry. So idolatry is a lot more extensive than physical idols alone. Drug sorcery, now that is particularly prevalent in the end times. We read of the book in Revelation, drug sorcerers, and the fact of modern life is that our healthcare industry we have an entire society of over-medicated and under-motivated people, so that is identified as a sin. Hatred is a sin in itself and the root of many other sins, namely murders and violence and hatred. There's just no place there is some place to hate the right things, but to hate anybody is unchristian. Quarrels is a manifestation of hatred. That's a confrontation in verbal or physical variety. It's unnecessary interchange of friction. And jealousies, envy is the root of all evil, it's been often said. So when we desire things that don't belong to it, loosely falls into the umbrella. It's slightly interchangeable with the sin of covetousness, whereby we harbor envy towards not items. The covetousness is to the items. The jealousy and envy is to the owner of the items. Fits of rage, that's a manifestation of hatred and quarrels. That's just unnecessary provocations of violence or verbal assault or any other variety. Selfish ambitions, now ambition, the Roman writer Juvenal said, is a parent of vices, but it is a virtue in itself. So there's nothing wrong with ambition, but selfish ambition is very, very much wrong, and this selfishness is the root of all sin in some sense. Dissensions, that means just disharmony or agitation or subversion amongst the lower tier people. So whatever place. And factions is division, which splinters unity. And he was contending with a faction of Judaizers, subverters. Envy, murders, drunkenness, wild parties, and the like, of which I forewarn you, even as I also said before, that those who practice such as these shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. So there's a startling consequence at the end. Now we review the list. We notice 17 items of vices or manifestations of forbidden fleshly indulgences. And envy and murders we already elaborated on envy. Murders needs no elaboration. It is what it is. It's a premeditated fatal blow. And drunkenness, now abstinence from alcohol is not commanded in Scripture, but drunkenness is always condemned as a sin. It is an unnecessarily excessive intake of alcohol, which stupors our senses, makes us more violent, less caring, less sensitive, less considerate. So it ultimately results in a degenerate version of ourselves, and it compromises our ability to effectively utilize our agency and arrive at correct moral decisions. Wild parties, that's more or less an extension of drunkenness, but there could be anything else and the like. So that means just anything along the lines of the 17 vices that were just mentioned. And now there are 9 virtues or fruits of the Spirit, and versus 17 vices. And why so negative, you may ask? Well, it's because humanity is a fallen creature, and the same disproportion is wielded throughout Scripture. So, for example, in the 28th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, we read of 15 blessings that they can expect for obedience, whereas the 16th or the 15th through 68th verse all pertain to the cursings that await them in the event of their disobedience. And in the Mosaic Law in general, there are 613 total laws, 365 of which are negative prohibitions, loosely translated as thou shalt nots, whereas the positive affirmations are number in 248, and those are more positive precepts, generally prefaced with thou shalt. And we have to be told what not to do, and more often than we have to be told what to do. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness. So fruit is significant because fruit can only be produced in nature. You cannot do it via machine, and the legalistic has a mechanistic and machine-like measurement, and they try to quantify righteousness, but the fruit is a natural manifestation, and it is something which has life in it, whereas that which a machine cannot duplicate life. So the fruit of the Spirit is love. Love is foundational to Christianity. It is we literally cannot say enough of it, so it should be self-evident that it is something good and praiseworthy. Joy is happy. Now, the Christian life is not one unending party. It's not a constant high, but we can have joy in our trials, and that is a fruit of the Spirit. Peace is self-evident. That just means more than tranquility, but more than the absence of conflict. It is the tranquility of mind and spirit. The Hebrews have a word, shalom, which really transcends our word of peace. Patience. Now, patience is necessary. It's an aspect of enduring to the end, which is the means of our salvation, and that demands patience because not everything we work for is going to have an immediate, not every investment we make is going to have an immediate dividend, but we do have faith that Yahweh does protect and care for his own. Kindness is just friendliness, or being essentially nice and not being rude. And goodness is a general term that just means not being bad, essentially. Trustworthiness, alternately translated as faithful, is fundamental to the faith for obvious reasons. And the remaining virtues or fruits of the Spirit are gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. So why is there no law? Well, you don't need to be told not to murder or steal or lie if you are told to love their neighbor. So when you replace the negative with the positive, then, as I earlier mentioned, the Spirit and the law both have their origin in Elohim, but the Spirit is Elohim itself, whereas the law is not. So ergo, it is superior and can fulfill and complete it, and the law is only necessary for an unrighteous, evil people. But to elaborate on the final two, gentleness, that just means not causing injury. It also means to be sympathetic and empathetic, and really just not having a mean bone in your body. It's meekness. Self-control, alternately translated as temperance. I've encountered more than one Bible teacher who will outright tell you to get rid of the book if it says self-control, because that who is submitted to the Spirit has no real sense of self. So ergo, we cannot take credit for disciplining ourselves, which is the manifestation of the verb, better translated as temperance. And those who are of Messiah have crucified the flesh with its passions and the desires. So having the flesh remain intact on us post-regeneration demands that it be crucified, metaphorically brought in and killed, essentially. So this is the doctrine of co-crucifixion, and he also writes of this in the 20th verse of the 2nd chapter. And so not only the flesh, but its evil manifestations, its passions and desires, which are forbidden and to be disciplined and discarded. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. So walking is a facet of life. It's emotion, and it's an application, and it's an action, and it's more of a verb. Well, live too is a verb, but the essential common connotation is to take the Spirit with us wherever we are, whatever we do, wherever we go. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. So the aim of basking in the abundance of spiritual blessings, which are the fruit of the Spirit, ought not to make us conceited, else we are lacking in some of the spirits and the manifestations thereof. If we are provoking one another, if we are unnecessarily causing confrontation and envying another, there's really no sense in that, and there's no reason for it, and that just means that we're not walking in the Spirit. So we do have the list right here, and any of these manifestations are antithetical, and within the two categories are interchangeable. And that concludes today's lesson. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.